I'm happy. I just thought you might like to know that. A 33-year-old man decided he wanted to see his neighborhood from a new perspective. He went down to the local Army surplus store and bought 45 used weather balloons. He strapped himself into a lawn chair, to which several of his friends tied the now helium-filled used weather balloons. He took with him something to drink, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and a BB gun, figuring he could shoot the balloons one at a time when he was ready to land. It's a true story, by the way. His name was Mr. Walters. He assumed the balloons would lift him about 100 feet in the air when he was caught off guard when the chair soared more than 11,000 feet into the sky, smack into the middle of the air traffic pattern at LAX. Because he was too frightened to shoot any of the balloons, he stayed airborne for more than 2 hours and forced the airport to shut down its runways for most of the afternoon. Welcome, it's all good. Take your time. Welcome, welcome. Glad you're here. Soon after he was safely grounded and cited by the police, reporters asked him 3 questions. Were you scared? Yes. Would you do it again? No. Why did you do it? Because you just can't sit there. Because you just can't sit there. Right? Even if sometimes we make a crazy decision in our lives, right? Even if sometimes it doesn't seem like it's the best idea in the world, sometimes in order to get us off our habits, get us out of our ruts, we make a decision. You know, did somebody say at the retreat, or did you say as we're preparing, perfection is the enemy of? Perfection is the enemy of procrastination? No, perfection is procrastination, and perfection is the enemy of getting things done. Right? If we're waiting to be perfect in our lives, and all we do is sit in the chair, we'll never rise up to 11,000 feet. And maybe that's a good thing. Although our series that we've taken a little while to get through is your attitude affects your altitude. We never rise up. We don't rise up unless we have an attitude that allows us to do that. So I have an invitation for you this morning. It's an invitation to decide. To decide who you are. To decide where you stand or sit. To decide right here this morning to see some things in your life differently. To perhaps change your story. We talked about this at our women's retreat, changing our story. Another story. A man disabled by polio never lost his desire to become an athlete. Despite total paralysis from the waist down, he became a national champion rope climber, a sport that called only for muscular arms and shoulders. He was once asked, "Hasn't your disability colored your attitude?" "Of course," he said. "But I have always decided on the colors." I've always decided on the colors. That's the invitation, to decide upon the colors of your attitude. You know, sometimes, and I think I talked about this a little bit last week, we feel like we're at the mercy of what's going on around us for our attitude. But as most things, if not everything in our life, it's an inside job. Our attitude is an inside job. So the invitation today is to change the way we see things, to choose different colors, to reverse a decision that maybe happened a long, long time ago. So long ago, in fact, that some of us don't even remember that a decision was made. We're just living into it. Or perhaps it wasn't even our decision. It's something we got from our parents, from our teachers, for our clergy, and we just went along with it. And that's how we run our life now, based on that subconscious or unconscious decision. Let me give you an example of the power of a single decision. So perhaps the most technologically advanced transportation system today is the space shuttle. Perhaps, or was. Is there still a space shuttle, Ricky? No. All right, so it was. Ricky's our resident rocket scientist. So it was when the shuttle was in production. So on the shuttle, attached to each side of the main fuel tank, were 2 rockets. They were called the solid rocket boosters, or SRBs. The SRBs, I read, were made in a factory in Utah. The engineers who designed the SRBs would have preferred to make them a little fatter, but they couldn't. And here's why. And I checked this in a lot of different sources, so I'm choosing to believe it's true. So, the SRBs can only be as wide as they were because they have to be shipped by train from the factory in Utah to the launch site. And the railroad line from the factory in Utah has to run through a tunnel in the mountains. So the SRBs must fit through the tunnel. Now, the tunnel is only slightly wider than the railroad track itself, which is precisely 4 feet, 8.5 inches wide. No more, no less. Railroad tracks are always precisely 4 feet, 8.5 inches apart. So that seems like a pretty odd number. What? 4 feet, 8.5 inches apart. So why 4 feet, 8.5 inches? Because British expatriates built the U.S. railroads, and that's the distance between the tracks of the English railway system. Why did the English build them? You with me? Why did the English build them that way? Because the first railroad lines were modeled after the pre-railroad tramways, and that's the distance they were. So why were those tramways 4 feet, 8.5 inches apart? Because the people who built those tramways used the same jigs and tools that were used for building wagons. And wagon wheels were always 4 feet, 8.5 inches apart. I have a Greek chorus here. So why did the wagon wheels have that spacing? Well, if the wagon builders of those days tried to use any other spacing, the wagon wheels would break on some of the old long-distance roads in England, because those ruts were 4 feet, 8.5 inches apart. So, how did those roads get to be 4 feet, 8.5 inches apart? The first long-distance roads in Europe and England were used by the legions of imperial Rome, traveling in war chariots. And all war chariot wheels were spaced exactly the same distance apart. 4 feet, 8.5 inches. Why? We're getting to it now. Because imperial Rome war chariots were made just wide enough to accommodate the back ends of 2 war horses. So, a major design feature of the space shuttle, one of the world's most advanced transportation systems, was determined over 2,000 years ago by the width of 2 horses' rear ends. Lesson's over, I think. I think we all get the lesson there. We don't know why we make decisions sometimes. We don't know. 2,000 years ago, somebody in our lineage made a decision that we're still living into today. So it's our opportunity to become aware of that, to become aware of what beliefs and attitudes and values we hold today that don't really serve you, but were made a long, long time ago. Maybe in a galaxy far, far away, for all we know. For all we know. Do you think you ever made a decision to feel less than? You made a decision to feel less than, to feel unworthy, to feel badly about who you are without somebody else helping you with that decision? Something perhaps a parent said, or a teacher said, or someone in the clergy said or did? Perhaps you made a decision about on how unfair life is after you experienced your first heartbreak. Perhaps you made a decision about how hard you have to work just to barely make ends meet because you watched your parents struggle with money, who watched their parents struggle, who watched their parents struggle. Did you make a decision perhaps about how it's God's will that you suffer and live in pain because of something a religious teacher once told you? What decisions have you participated in or made that do not serve you in your life? Now, I realize that they may have been unconscious decisions, but they were decisions nonetheless. So my question for you this morning is, are you ready to decide differently? Yes. Yeah. Yes? Somebody? Yes. Good. An author of the book called The Way Forward, Principles and Practices for Empowered Living writes, everyone by age 18 has been ill, has lost something precious, been abused, betrayed, rejected, or denied what is his or her right. The list is endless, he writes. In spite of these things, many have made it to greatness, while others have sunk into oblivion. Where one chooses to be is just a decision to be made. Decision. Those who are living a life of power are those who decided to use all their pain as tools and catalysts for growth. So, again, I extend the invitation. Today, are you ready to decide to make a different decision about how you are living your life or a part of your life? We have the power of creation in our lives. We have the power to decide. Our co-founder, Myrtle Fillmore, tells us why. She says, as you engage, and I turned her words a little bit into more modern, as you engage in constant, conscious spiritual practice, she said, you will learn that your mind receives from two sources: the universal mind of being, God, which has its outlet through your consciousness, and the intellectual activities of the individual mind, which have both conscious and subconscious phases of expression. So we can choose, she says, to partner with spirit, to partner with divine consciousness, or to pivot to our human consciousness. We can make decisions based on our human consciousness, or we can make decisions based on our God consciousness. When we partner with God consciousness, we make divinely guided decisions. When we partner or use our human consciousness, we make human decisions. She says, now that which you receive from the mind of God is always good, always helpful, health-inspiring, and peace-inspiring. That which you receive from the reports of your senses or the minds of others may be true and helpful, or it may be false and harmful. She says, the study and practice of truth will help you to discriminate between the false and the true, and to combine rightly the ideas of the Christ mind within you, that you may express and bring forth whatsoever you will. We have the power to co-create with our divine consciousness. And what happens for me, maybe it happens for you, is that I forget that. When I'm in it, when I'm in my human consciousness, and when I'm going along, I forget that I have this incredible creative power within me. And that when I turn to that, it always steers me right. It always steers me in the right direction. Decisions that we made years ago were perfectly valid for where we were then. So this is not about beating ourselves up. But they may not necessarily be valid now. In 1968, the Swiss dominated the watch industry. Remember that? Enterprising Swiss inventors invented the electronic watch movement at their research institute. It was rejected by every Swiss watch manufacturer. They said based on their past experiences in the industry, they assumed this couldn't possibly be a watch because it had no gears or springs. Now Seiko, Japanese company I think, took one look at this invention and took over the world watch market. They made a different decision. When Univac invented the computer, they refused to talk to business people who inquired about it. Because the computer was invented for scientists, they assumed it had no business applications. You remember Univac? Then along came IBM. We remember IBM. And IBM dominated the market. And even IBM itself once said that according to their past experiences in the computer market, they assumed that there was virtually no market for the personal computer. In fact, they said they were absolutely certain that there were no more than 5 or 6 people in the entire world who had a need for a personal computer. Guess what happened then? Apple. That's what happened then. So maybe the thinking of that's the way it's always been, or that's the way I've always been, is not the way to go as we move further along. So we learn to do it this way, and we continue to do it this way because this is what our mindset tells us that's the way it should be done. And we never question it because it's unconscious. We never make a different decision because that's the way it should be done. So here are some mindsets, some decisions that you may have made or that you might be familiar with. You may know that you are limited. You may know that you are controlled by heredity, the environment, and supernatural forces. You may know that knowledge and experience are available only through your 5 senses. You may know that human experience is dangerous and evil. You may know that some people are luckier than you. You may know that life is chaotic. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Sometimes, right? Well, the good news is that we can shift to a different mindset. We can make a different decision. We can change our lives by paying attention to everything we think. And not just that, but to everything we do unconsciously. To question what it is we're doing in any given moment, how we're making a decision. The power of making a different decision and becoming aware of where we're thinking and how we can support not only ourselves, but other people in our lives. We create our own reality. We create our own reality by the decisions that we make. And when we know that Spirit is available to us, and that Spirit it comes rushing in when we are open and receptive, we know, that's when we know we can make those new decisions and live in a different way. I'll tell you what, I feel so much better about myself and that name that I carried for 17 years, right? That I can see that and affirm that and know that that's beautiful. And it's because I do this work. And when you have those experiences, as I know you do, it's because you're vigilant for Spirit, because you're vigilant for God, you're vigilant for having a space for Spirit to come in and work through you and to align your cells and to adjust your attitude and to bring healing and wholeness into your life. At any given moment, we can decide to know our own divinity. We can decide to put aside something that we have carried for most of our lives or for 17 years and allow Spirit to express through us so that we can make a different decision. Let's pray. Sweet Spirit, my mind is open to new perspectives. I am willing to make a new decision about myself, my life, my circumstances. I trust in my spiritual insight as I go forward in that trust, in power, and in enthusiasm to co-create the life that is mine. And I affirm this truth for each and every one of us. And so it is. Amen.